his strange practice and wondered why another official from the ME's office was not present. It is important to confirm that Dr. Wecht believed it to be highly unlikely that Dr. Francisco would falsify the vital information in his report. If he had done so, it would have served the purpose of ruling out any question of Dr. King surviving the attack, thus eliminating any consideration of the possibility of any adverse intervention during treatment at the hospital. Having said that, we know that the wound was very serious and most likely fatal, even though those present would not have known the actual extent of the injuries. I am constrained to note that Dr. Francisco was a longtime medical examiner who appeared to have a good working relationship with the local law enforcement and prosecutorial officials. It must also be stated that Dr. Wecht was not and could not have been aware of the more recent facts uncovered and discussed above by our investigation, which have led me to conclude that in this case, nothing is precluded. Finally, at Dr. Wecht's suggestion, I spoke with Dr. Michael Baden, who led the HSCA medical panel. He needed some time to review his notes and then graciously called me back on June 25, 2014. He agreed that it was unlikely that Dr. King could have survived that bullet wound, but also agreed that the doctors in the ER could not have known the extent of the spinal injury. He said that the panel did have a question about whether or not the spine was transected, severed, but there was no doubt that there was spinal injury. He also found it strange and unusual that Dr. Sprunt's name was on the report when he was not associated with the medical examiner's office and also not present at the autopsy. He noted that, in fact, Dr. Francisco told them that he did not trace or track the bullet, thereby eliminating the possibility of drawing any conclusions concerning the origin of the shot. He was surprised to learn that in his testimony at the civil trial in 1999, 21 years later, in response to my question, Dr. Francisco changed his story and contended that he had tracked the bullet. In light of all that we have learned, I ask the listener to understand why I have come to believe that, with respect to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., no act, no matter how heinous, by any public official, is unthinkable. Finally, Ralph Abernathy's self-serving account during these last moments of Dr. King's life is quite different and should be noted. He said that he insisted on remaining in the emergency room, though they tried to get him and Bernard Lee to leave. Dr. Wilhite did confirm that he alone was sitting in a corner of the room for a while. Strangely, though, Ralph said he saw a hole in Dr. King's chest, large enough for me to put both my fists in. That observation, of course, makes no sense at all. Dr. King took the bullet above the lower left chin area of his face. The slug exited his head and re-entered his neck, proceeding to a point just below his left shoulder blade, emerging as a visible lump just inside the skin. The hole in his jaw and neck was, indeed, a gaping wound, but no entry was through the chest, so I have no idea about what Ralph claims he saw. He also stated that as Dr. King was dying in the emergency room, he embraced him and felt his last breath. In terms of everything we have learned, this clearly did not take place. Ralph's description of his visit to the morgue also does not conform to another account. Memphis detective Barry Neal Linville, whom I came to know quite well, told me in 1992 that he vividly recalled a number of Dr. King's colleagues, including Abernathy, entering the morgue in a group to pay last respects before the autopsy began. Linville, who had no reason to lie about his observations, said he wished he had a camera. He was behind some lockers and said the group had to pass by the morgue/autopsy table in single file, one behind the other, with Ralph in the lead. He said that when Ralph reached the head of the table, he patted Dr. King's head with his hands on the side of his face and said, "Goodbye, old friend." Linville said that as he spoke those words, Dr. King's old friend was grinning from ear to ear. Obviously, Barry Linville's observation can only be taken at face value. He was a good old country boy who had come to work in the city. I found him to be transparent and not capable of fabricating such a scenario. If one takes a statement along with the clear inaccuracies and omissions of Ralph's other inexplicable accounts of events, as set out in his book "And the Wall Came Tumbling Down," it presents a worrying picture. I have spent long hours trying to reconcile the number of inconsistencies in statements by Ralph, who was a friend for over 25 years. Sadly, I have failed in this effort. In my view, one should be concerned about his omissions, particularly that of the heavy military presence already ensconced in the hospital when Dr. King, accompanied by Ralph and Bernard Lee, arrived. Ron Tyler Atkins's account also needs to be taken into serious consideration, because though he was not present at the scene, his recollection of the conversations he heard between his father, MPD Police and Fire Director Holloman, and Dr. Breen Bland reinforced the credibility of the statements made by Lula Mae Shelby to her family on the morning of April 5. The wound resulting from a single rifle shot was almost certainly fatal, requiring no intervention in the emergency room at St. Joseph's Hospital. Having said that, from Ron Atkins Tyler's recollections, which have to qualify as admissions against personal interest, preparations were in place to ensure that Dr. King would never leave that hospital alive. It must, however, also be noted that another doctor on ER duty, Dr. Ted Galen, stated that he did not recall seeing Dr. Bland in the emergency room area, and also that he did not know Lula Mae Shelby. A cynic might observe that Dr. Galen, similar to the rest of the doctors involved with Dr. King in the last moments of his life, is a lifelong practitioner in the Memphis area, with all the connections, associations, and personal success that such a career entails. So his version and recollection might well reflect this reality, whereas Lula Mae Shelby, and certainly Russell Atkins Tyler, had every reason not to disclose what they saw, heard, and knew. To be kind, however, Dr. Galen and the others, perhaps, may not individually have been in a position to observe the activity in the ER during the closing minutes of Dr. King's life. On balance, this entire St. Joseph's Hospital incident appears to be yet another indication that Dr. King was not going to be allowed to leave Memphis alive. Chapter 22. The Final Summation and Afterword. When it happened, I was shocked. How naive were we then? Thoughts of conspiracy openly mocked. Again, the sword above the pen. Half a lifetime later, the truth appears, and darkness yields to light. Long gone and dried are all the tears. Dawn follows our longest night. A painful truth takes its turn, without relief or solace. Even justice, for which we yearn, can never compensate the loss. So what was it for this long endeavor, the expensive trial for family and love, and why this tie I could not sever, ever, as though being driven from above? But all journeys must one day end, so it is with this one, confronting the loss of a dear friend, now nearly half a century gone. Punishment is not the goal of a mission driven by love. Each involved has a personal soul, without any respite from above. It has indeed taken nearly 50 years for the fundamental truth to emerge. Over this time, as noted earlier, we have probably acquired more detailed knowledge about this political assassination than we have ever had about any previous historical event. This is largely because I have been unwilling to leave this case to history's official dustbin. As a result, witnesses have come forward, evidence has emerged, and a formidable truth has been nurtured. It may be useful to summarize the relevant events that took place during the last hour or thereabouts of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. The shooter arrives in the area and leaves the red and white Chevrolet convertible belonging to the fireman friend of Strausser in the parking area of the fire station. Rifle range janitor Lenny Curtis tries to call a pastor he knows to alert him to his suspicions about what he has observed. He does not make contact. 16-year-old Ron Atkins Tyler heads to Memphis on a new Honda bike, carrying what may well be a backup gun, which he turns over to his brother. He rides around the area for some time, and then stops his Honda as instructed around 5:50 p.m. near the corner of Butler on Mulberry by the fire station. The Alpha 184 snipers determine their target's location and wait. The invaders meet in their rooms adjoining Dr. King's on the second floor of the Lorraine Motel and discuss the upcoming march. The Holloman-Atkins group, including Raoul, the shooter, and Earl Clark, meet in room 5B of the rooming house. James, having left his belongings and been sent away, is told by Raoul to go to the movies. Dr. Breen Bland, head of surgery at St. Joseph's Hospital and Atkins's family doctor, sits waiting in his office in a building adjoining the hospital. MPD Community Police Officer Ed Reddit is told by Eli Arkin, Deputy Director of MPD Intelligence, that a threat has been made on his, Ed's, life, and he must leave his post at the fire station. He is taken to MPD headquarters before being brought home, and he observes more military brass than he has ever seen. It emerges that the threat was confirmed by Philip Manuel, a U.S. Senate McClellan Committee lead investigator who was also associated with the 902nd Military Intelligence Group. Reddit is ordered home by Frank Holloman. PsyOps photographers continue to photograph everything going on at the Lorraine Motel and its parking lot, eventually culminating in one of them filming the shooter as he lowers his rifle and turns away to leave the scene. Mama Atkins drives her Chevy Nova down to Mulberry Street and parks north of the Lorraine Motel in case transportation backup is needed. Ray Alvis Hendricks of the Corps of Engineers and William Zaney Reed, a photographic supply salesman, leave Jim's Grill around 5:35 p.m. and examine James's Mustang parked in front. They begin to walk north on South Main. James Earl Ray returns to the rooming house at around 5 p.m. after getting some ice cream at the Chiska Hotel. Raoul is still in the room. James notices a small radio or walkie-talkie in his jacket pocket. Raoul suggests that James leave and go into one of the local movie theaters for the time being. James walks around and enters a bar, then remembers the flat spare tire and walks briskly back to the car. He gets into the Mustang around 5:45 to 5:50 p.m. and drives north on South Main in an effort to get his flat spare tire fixed. As he reaches Vance Avenue, 1 block north of Hewling, he turns right just as Hendricks and Reed are about to cross. They observe him. James drives to and stops at a gas station and asks to have the tire fixed. He is told he will have to wait. He pulls out to go to another station and buy some gas. Around 5:30 to 5:40 p.m., Invaders member Charles Izzy Harrington answers the motel room door and is told by a member of the motel staff that the invaders will have to leave, ostensibly because the SCLC will no longer be paying their bill. The motel worker delivering the message confirms that the instructions come from the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is observed by Harrington standing in the parking lot looking at his watch. Shocked and angry, they gather up their belongings and are gone by 5:50 p.m. Shortly before this, Merrill McCullough pulls up in his car with the Reverend James Orange and Jim Bevel. At 5:50 p.m., MPD officer Willie B. Richmond from the fire station observes Reverend Billy Kyles knocking on Dr. King's door. It opens slightly, and a few words are exchanged. The door closes, and Kyles walks north on the balcony, stops around 40 to 50 feet away, and stands at the railing. Between 5:30 and 5:45 p.m., the shooter and Earl Clark leave room 5B and go down the back stairway and out of the back door to the heavily overgrown brush area behind the rooming house. They are partially observed descending the stairs by Grace Stevens in her room. Outside, they are joined by Lloyd Jowers, who has come through the kitchen rear door of Jim's Grill. They set themselves up in an area of the bushes, keeping low and out of sight in the soggy area, with Jowers kneeling down. Around 5:30 p.m., David Mark Young arrived and parked near the north end of the South Main Street building that also housed the rooming house on the south end of the attached building. He then went upstairs carrying 2 rifles wrapped in cloth and arrived in the area of an open window immediately adjacent to the rooming house bathroom window. Between 5:45 and 6 p.m., Olivia Catling has begun to prepare dinner in her home on Mulberry Street between Hewling and Vance. Also around this time, yellow cab driver Buddy Butler is trying to fit a lot of luggage into his cab, luggage belonging to a departing Lorraine Motel guest. His cab is parked inside the driveway of the motel. Around 5:55 p.m., taxi driver James McCraw, answering a call to pick up Charlie Stevens, drives up and parks in front of the rooming house, goes inside and up the stairs to pick up Charlie.